All right, what is up, everybody? We are live for another episode of our weekly Wednesday live Q&A. And this week we are talking about a proper post-show approach. So as always, I had people ask me questions on my Facebook account. I usually post that about 11 o'clock Central Time, roughly around there. Had a lot of great questions, as always, roll in. So as people start to roll in here, we will get things going. I see Ben is on Instagram, and I am streaming on Instagram as well. So we are going to get things going, and Ben is actually going to lead us off today. He asked a couple of great questions, and I am going to get to all of them. There he is, Ben, both on Facebook and on Instagram. He's the real MVP. All right, thanks, Ben, for leading us off. We're going to get right to it, guys. Alrighty. Now, Ben asked, so we're talking about post-show exclusively here. Exclusively. So keep that in mind for all the questions that are relevant today. Now, Ben asked, we're going to go in order here one at a time. Do you like to bump clients back up to essential maintenance period after prep, slightly over, under, and why? So I don't necessarily go off of the term maintenance. That is definitely a loose term that gets thrown around a lot, in my opinion. What I do like to do within the first couple of weeks is just up food aggressively. So, for example, some of my bodybuilders, they can go up to, let's say, the day after the show, 80 to 120 grams of carbs, like that, and that's their starting point, and then we go from there. Ladies, maybe anywhere from 40 to 80, somewhere in there. I give them a bump right away, no questions asked, just hit it. Basically, if they're going right into an extended off season. I don't necessarily like the term maintenance, just because maintenance is a constantly moving target, and I think it gets thrown around too much. I don't even like using it, but it's unfortunately like one of those terms that is just not going to go away. So I don't necessarily bump them to maintenance. I just start throwing a bunch of food at them and see what their weight does. Ben's second question asked, do I ask for blood work after prep? If so, how long after? Well, here's the thing, is you definitely want to have blood work done before, if you have blood work done before, I should say. That's your baseline, right? And this is going to come up later on in a couple of the hormone questions. So, how long afterwards? So let's say you get your blood work done 6 months out from the show. Pretty typical. Maybe you haven't even started dieting yet. Then after the show, maybe you'd want to get it checked 3 months, and then maybe you want to get checked 6 months after. I haven't had anybody particularly do that. I know a lot of the enhanced athletes tend to get a lot of their blood work taken a little bit more often than the natural guys, just because the natural guys' testosterone levels and stuff like that take a lot longer, or they're not as volatile, I would say, as the enhanced athletes go. Ben also asked, how do you approach this phase in terms of training? Give the individual is probably not primed for hardcore ball busting training. Very true, Ben, and thank you for asking that. What I usually like to do, so for example, let's say someone has been training 5-6 days a week. I feel like most of us do. I, for example, train 6 days a week. What I would probably do for myself is first take like 5 solid days off of the gym after you're done competing. And then after that, I would actually drop it back to a 4 or 5 day split for about a month. Let your body rest up, make sure you're recovering. Obviously, if you're going to be eating more food, hopefully your body is going to be recovering a little bit better. So take that first month as kind of a building phase. In that first month also, hopefully some of the strength starts to come back, but don't go balls out like Ben's saying. You need baby steps, because you just put your body through hell, essentially, prepping for super long. I mean, for myself, it's going to be damn near a year that I've been pursuing fat loss. By the time I'm done competing in November, it'll be like 50 weeks that I've been dieting. Not necessarily straight through, as you guys know, But I've been going hard. I will be going hard for an extended period of time without taking pretty much any breaks. So I would definitely take the first month slow and then see how it goes. Do you specifically ask your clients to stay under your guidance post-show? If so, what are some of the downfalls you see the 12-week prep packages leaving clients alone afterwards? So Ben has another fantastic question. I do recommend that clients stay with me post-show at least for another 12 weeks, honestly. In the first 12 weeks, that's where you could see the most weight regain. Anytime after that, the rate of gain is much lower just because your body's used to eating more food. Those first 12... Hopefully I'm back, guys. Hopefully I'm back. All right. It looks like I'm back. Sorry about that. Anyway, I usually do recommend people stay with me for at least 8 to 12 weeks. And that way the recomposition can happen. I could throw more food at them and they don't gain as much fat. If I do let somebody go on their own, which is at the end of the day their decision, that's when you do see them gain quite a bit of weight back in a very, very short amount of what do I recommend? Ben's last question. What do I recommend as far as goal setting to kick off an off season? So obviously, we're going to evaluate how you placed. Is there any body parts that we need to bring up? Like I said earlier, you don't need to necessarily go busting out. Let's say like if your legs are like a weak point for you, the first month you don't need to start training legs like 3 times a week, right? You got to gradually go into it. But having a clear set plan of what you're actually looking to do going into the off season, some goals, maybe evaluate a timeline depending on what you're doing. So like last time, for example, I stepped off stage. I was in my first pro season. I did okay. I mean, I won 1 pro show, got my butt kicked in another pro show, and I knew that I had to take a lot of time off. So my goal was to come back and be competitive in the pro ranks. And that was like the number 1 goal, right? So hopefully that happens this year, obviously. But coming back from that, what does that mean for me? That means, well, I was going to take an extended period of time off from the stage. It'll be like 3.5 years. So that's step 1. Step 2, evaluate my body parts, evaluate my physique. My physique was fairly well balanced, but I did have some lacking body parts in my opinion. Everybody told me that my symmetry was good, but it's just getting larger. So getting larger meant taking more time off the stage. So evaluate where you're at and then kind of take a couple steps back as to where is that going to get you. So Ben, thank you for leading off us with some fantastic questions. Let's see if anybody else asks any questions on our Ben, and then we'll just get moving right along because people tend to comment underneath. Yep. Jacob asked, what are some of the best ways to keep competitors on track post-show to mitigate from putting on massive amounts of weight, losing motivation, etc.? Damn, that is a tough one, Jacob. And the only problem with that is motivation. A lot of people, when they compete for a show, that's their number 1 goal, right? And then after the show, they're just like, I don't know what to do with myself. And that's when the long-term goals kind of help out a lot. And it's not like I really struggle with it too much, just because like I'm more comfortable with where I'm at within the sport. But I feel like some people that have super duper high hopes for themselves and maybe that they don't place as well, they feel like they're lost. So maybe, that's something that they have to think about. Motivation is intrinsic, it has to come from within. There's nothing that I could tell a client that's going to help them stay motivated. They have to feel it for themselves, unfortunately. As far as keeping competitors on track for a show, there are some things that I do for some people, I should say, to help them stay on track a little bit better. For people that don't necessarily handle like to the gram strict macronutrient intake after a show, I do give some people ranges to follow. They feel that it helps them, be a little bit more flexible within their diet. So that's one method that I've used, but really post-show period is very hard. And I think that the motivational aspect might be even the hardest, and not necessarily sticking to the diet, which a lot of people actually fail sticking to the diet as well. And we're going to get there. We'll cover some tips on that later. All right. Jeff asked, getting off of Ben's questions, he was kind of monopolizing the whole thing. Jeff asked, obviously things vary depending on what is next for the athletes, but do you typically keep set macros prescribed in a post-show diet, or do you set calories and set the amount of protein and leave carbs and fats for the athlete's discretion? So, I mean, I definitely set macros in the post-show period. I know what Jeff is getting at, and I could see where he's coming from. Maybe later on, but within those first so many weeks, we're used to rigorous training, or tracking, I should say. So I like to try to stick on point with a macronutrient breakdown. So that's a little bit tougher to say. Earlier, I did say those ranges kind of come in handy in the post-show period as well. But once again, there's specific macronutrient ranges. And then, yeah, I mean, as a fallback, we could definitely go to calories, but I would like to be a little bit more precise than just hit a protein goal and get your calories in. So I like to be a little bit more precise if possible, but as a very last resort, yes, we can fall back on the calories. So that was a great question, Jeff. And then Matthias says, when to push during contest prep, further out or later in a contest prep. So Matthias is one of my guys. He is prepping for a couple of shows this fall, September, mid-September, whatever you want to call that, late summer, early fall. And yeah, I'm a big fan of pushing early. Matthias knows that because I told him this week that we were going to start pushing. But I think he just wants me to tell everybody that. So when our energy levels are higher, essentially when we're eating more food, when we're doing less cardio, is a time to push further out. Why? Well, the more time that we have, the slower that we have to go. So we don't necessarily need to push the pedal to the metal when we're 18 weeks out. Matthias is 18 weeks out. And I told him, look, man, I'd rather be aggressive now. That way we could actually reverse you into the show. Because perfect scenario, I would like to reverse somebody into their show. Matthias is looking good, but I want to make sure that we have at least like 3 weeks of reversing him into his show in September. So what does that mean? He's basically got to be ready by the end of August. And guys, it's May. And a lot of people don't understand the timeline when how to properly peak for a show. Everybody thinks it happens in peak week. Actually, the hard work is supposed to be done like 3 to 6 weeks out, and then it's easy cruising from there. You actually start upping your food, and that's what I plan to do. That's what I try to do for a lot of my clients, and that's why people ask me, well, why are you doing such an extended prep? Well, I'm taking diet breaks along the way. That, and I have essentially September, October, and November that I'm going to be increasing or holding my food steady as I go throughout my competition season. So yes, I do plan to compete in October and November, but my work, the work I plan to do, I need to be ready by September 1st essentially. And same thing with Matthias. He's not competing as long as me because he's actually coming from Sweden and competing in the United States. So he's just going to be here for 2-3 weeks. That's it. So we need to get him ready early because his time schedule is very, very short. So those of you who have a little bit more time to work with, I would still recommend pushing further out than closer to the show because then obviously the closer to the show you are, the more stress you're under. And pushing closer to the show and having high stress, those two things do not work hand in hand together. So push early, maybe a time to push. And I'm not necessarily pushing yet because my weight keeps coming off. Matthias, on the other hand, saw a little bit of an increase this week. So that's why we're pushing now. If I were to see an increase sometime soon, I would definitely start pushing myself. That's something that you just have to evaluate. Look, let's suffer now a little bit so in the future I don't have to suffer a lot. Hopefully that makes sense. All right, guys. Holly asked, do I recommend taking a few days off post-show from the gym to help your body recoup? Yes. I answered that earlier, actually, in one of my rambles that I had. But yeah, I would recommend taking 4 or 5 days off completely from the gym. No cardio, no lifting. By the end of prep, your body's just pretty much wrecked. I would still stay active. Don't just sit on the couch. But yeah, take some time off. Let your body recoup. Obviously, if you're, like I said earlier, I'm going to go through a 50-week contest prep, going at it 6 days a week with the lifting, really not taking too many days off, just 1 day a week. So yeah, by 50 weeks of beating myself up, being in a caloric deficit, I don't know for exactly how many weeks I'm going to be in a caloric deficit for, just because I am taking those diet breaks. I see you, Carl. So yeah, I mean, your body's going to be beat up, so I would definitely recommend taking a handful of days off from the gym, but then get back at it. So I will pause here for a sec and say that at the end of a contest prep, your body is primed for two things. Your body is primed, and because, let's face it, like you're in a caloric deficit, and when you go into a maintenance phase, like I said earlier, don't necessarily like to use that, or when you go into a surplus, your body is primed for fat storage and muscle gain, actually. So you could see really, really good gains coming out of a season, but you just have to make sure that your food is obviously controlled because you don't want to gain a ton of fat. So Holly, very good question there to lead us off. Holly actually had a few questions here, so we're going to get to those. If someone is competing in more than one show per season, do you have a time recommendation between shows? For example, 2 weeks minimum or up to 6 to 8 weeks max? Yeah, so that's a good one. I mean, for example, like I was just talking about Matthias. He's competing back-to-back weekends this year. He's coming all the way from Sweden to the United States. He doesn't have much of a choice. Financially, it just doesn't make sense for him to stick around in the United States for that long, right? He's got better stuff to do back in Sweden, right? We're not going to keep him here forever. So yeah, I mean, it can be done. You just have to execute properly, right? You're not going to go and binge after that first show and expect you to look good, at that second show just 6 days later. So that's a tough one. I would say ideally I would like to see at least a week or two. I think mentally that helps people prepare a little bit better. Going from show to show, weekend to weekend, that's tough. I don't think I've done it. I guess no, I haven't done it. I've had a couple weeks. I've had 2 weeks in between shows, and I did fine. But ideally, you would like a couple weeks in between shows, especially if you're traveling. That's a tough one. If you're traveling, a lot of these shows you do have to travel an extended period of time for. So I would recommend, at least 2 weeks in between. Now, Holly also asked, how does competing in more than one show affect the body and the metabolism? Is it more likely to cause metabolic damage to do multiple shows per season? I would say if you approach it the correct way, the answer is no. As I said earlier in this video, I plan to compete September, October, November. Ideally, if everything goes according to plan, if I make it to the World Contest, which I hope I do, I think I have a good shot. So I'm going to compete over many months. Would I recommend that to a first-time competitor? Absolutely not. I actually try to talk people out of competing for multiple months in a row who are first-time competitors, because holding stage conditioning is not something easily done. And this will be the longest that I will hold stage conditioning for essentially 2 straight months from mid-September to mid-November. So I mean, basically it's 2 straight months that'll be like that. And that's a long time, 8 solid weeks, maybe 10 solid weeks of holding stage conditioning. That's not easy. So for a first-time competitor, I would try to have, your shows in a 4 to 6 week period. Anything over that is going to be a little bit overkill. So just watch yourself when it comes to picking your shows. But is there metabolic damage? Not necessarily. So like I said earlier, I'm going to do the majority of my work from now until the end of August. And then by the time August rolls around, I'm up in my food. Because I know that if I were to continue to diet after my first show, be in a big caloric deficit, I could potentially lose muscle. And I can't lose muscle in between shows. I have to sustain it and or regain some of it, especially in the pro lineups. So ideally, if you execute this properly, if you're going to do multiple shows in a row, do your work beforehand, get to where you need to be, and then start increasing your food as your shows go on. So guys, like I said, I'm digging now. Like maybe some of you saw the picture I put up on Instagram the other day. I'm about to put up another one tonight of a back shot, and a lot of people are like, damn dude, like you're lean, you're getting lean. I had some people in the gym tell me today, like, dude, you're wasting away. I'm like, well, I'm 179 pounds, I'm gonna get down to 168, 170, so maybe I'm 9 pounds, 11 pounds away from where I need to be. And like I said, it's basically September 1st that I want to be there, and that's a ton of time. But I want to be ready early so I can start increasing my food, and that way I don't lose a lot of muscle in between the times of my shows. So Holly, that was a very good question. Hopefully we just increase our food as weeks out from our very first contest. Now, Holly asked one more question, and then we'll go on to some other ones. How much cardio should one do in reverse out of a deficit? So once again, that's on a need basis. Obviously, it depends on how much cardio you're doing in the first place. But if you are someone that can handle a lot of cardio, and some of my clients can, they legitimately like doing cardio, which that's not me. Once again, I've kind of gone on rants about maybe I won't even do cardio this prep, in all honesty, but that's neither here nor there. So if you're someone that can handle a lot of cardio, keep it in and increase food. But if you're someone that feels the need like they have to eat, then increase that first, keep cardio. But if it's vice versa, if you're okay with eating a little bit less and you absolutely hate cardio, start pulling that cardio right away. In an ideal situation, I would just go with both, because I feel like you do need more food right after a show regardless, and then start whittling cardio down. In all honesty, you shouldn't be doing that much cardio once again leading up to a show. Hopefully you're actually dialing it back so you're not wasting a lot of muscle tissue. But once again, that's just the perfect storm, and that's if you give yourself a lot of time, which hopefully a lot of people do. Now, Samantha asked a very good question here, is how long does it usually take for a typical male and female client to return to normal in regards to hormones, and even more specifically, cycles in women? And then there's a couple follow-up questions. We'll get to them on hormones. So what I've seen in the past, and some people have had their blood work done, is that really, as long as you diet for, it may take up to half, if not that full time, to regain back to normal. I know that sounds crazy. So let's say you diet for 16 weeks. Like, it may take an additional 8 to 16 weeks to regain, normal hormones again. And honestly, I don't think a lot of people are dieting for 8 or 16 weeks. I think they're dieting for a lot longer, myself included. Even with my diet breaks, my total time in a deficit is still going to be significant. Are my hormones what they were in the off season? No. I mean, today I could kind of tell a little bit more sluggish than I usually were. As you might have seen on my Instagram post, you just got to put your head down and do your work. But that doesn't necessarily need to be affected by our hormones. But that was Sam's question. How long does it take? I mean, it takes a good while. So up to half the time and or equal time to reset back to normal. And that's why, once again, at the beginning of the video, I said about taking 3.5 years off from stage to stage. Like, the people that can compete spring fall every year, they just look worse and worse, and you could tell their hormones are shit. They're never gaining new muscle, and they actually keep losing muscle. Even the people that compete year after year after year at the same time, they don't give themselves enough time for their hormones to rebound. So let's say you diet for 6 months. It may take 6 months to get back to your normal hormone levels, but then you're dieting again, right? So it's like there is no time at optimal hormone levels in order for you to start gaining new muscle. So that's why an extended off season is very important as well. And I know it's tempting to get back on the stage. Maybe some people do it for business reasons. My personal goal doesn't revolve around business reasons, is why I compete. So you just have to evaluate how much time you need off. And really, I would suggest a 2-year off season for everybody, if not more, depending on what you're looking to do. So definitely take that off. Now, Sam did say menstrual cycles for women. That does vary. Some people don't even lose their menstrual cycles. Other people do. I mean, I've heard people that lose their menstrual cycle. They haven't worked with me necessarily, but just some friends that tell me. They get it back like 1 or 2 times after prep, then it kind of disappears for a couple months, and then it's like spotty here and there. So I think that, once again, it depends on how long they diet. If it is 6 months, it may take 6 months for everything to kind of normalize again. That is a very common thing, but hopefully, if you are doing it the right way, maybe you won't even lose it, especially if you're using diet breaks in there and definitely getting enough fat in. Holly asked again, when getting hormones checked for males and females, what is the optimal magic number one should be at? The normal range on those tests are so broad. So yes, Holly, I actually got my blood work done the other day. It was not a hormone panel, but it was just kind of a general health screen. And those ranges are still very wide. I would agree, both ranges on the hormone panel and on just the general health screens, they are extremely wide. Now, what I will say is that everybody has their set point, right? I mean, I didn't get my blood work done. I have a problem getting my blood work done. I'm definitely afraid of blood and afraid of needles, and I pass out every single time. This time I did not pass out, which was like the first time ever. So I and I usually like throw up and get physically ill. So getting blood work for me is just not an option. But anyway, what should the magic numbers be? Well, if you have your baseline, if you get it done like pre-contest, pre-diet, then you could look back at what you were then compared to now. Everyone's different. Like, let's say my testosterone level might be 1,000. I forget what the units are. I'm sorry for that, just because I don't look into it too much. But if you, by the end of prep, if your testosterone is at like 200, that there's a big difference there, obviously, in the range, and it could still be in the quote unquote normal range, but that's low for you. So really, you have to look at your baseline numbers and then see where you are after prep. So unfortunately, I can't give a specific just because everybody is very different. All right, Matt asked, he was kind of joking, Matt Jackson, always trolling me. He asked, is a box of donuts a good idea on Sunday after show? Not to be a schmuck, but asking something dumb. Yes, Matt, that is a bad idea to eat a box of donuts after your show. I know he was kind of joking, but I think what a lot of people end up doing after their show is just like going ham. They go ham on Saturday night after the show, spills into Sunday. Sunday they continue to eat like a pig, and then Monday they're just a watery mess. Ideally, and I mean this is what I usually encourage. Ideally, and this is dependent on when their person's next show is go ahead and have something good on Saturday night. Typically, our intake on Saturday is a little bit higher on show day as it is anyway, especially with the carb loads. On Sunday, I prescribe set macros. Just to get back on track, they're usually higher macros than a normal day, just because people tend to be hungrier after a show. Then on Monday, we're back to normal numbers, and we're cruising depending on what our goals are. If there's another show, we're going to evaluate where you're at after a couple of days and then change your numbers accordingly. But what Matt is getting at is that it's probably not a good idea ever to do like a post-show binge. I mean, I definitely did one like in my very, very last competition last year, or not, I shouldn't say last year. Last time I competed, just because I was in a caloric deficit for like 45 weeks and I was just tired of it. So I went ham for a day. Maybe a day and a half. But after that, I got it under control more or less, and continued on with my numbers. Let me just check here. There are some other questions under Matt's or comments, but we're gonna skip over those because they're just more or less comments. I had another question asked here. Shalane, I hope I'm saying your name right, asked, what is the right training approach after your show if you're feeling weak and depleted? So ideally, once again, you would want to take 4 or 5 days off from the gym. Take a step back of your frequency. So if you're training 5-6 days a week, train 4 to 5 days a week. Maybe even drop that down to 3, and that's after you've taken the time. Drop your volume if you are keeping track of your volume, and dial back some of your weights. It's just like focus on form. Not getting hurt, and then slowly you could start adding volume back in. But within that first 4 weeks, I should say, I recommend taking things fairly slowly, just to kind of let your body heal. Make sure you're recovering after every single workout, because that's one thing that a lot of people don't realize is, if you still are in a in a lesser caloric deficit, your recovery is going to be a little bit better than it was in a very, very large deficit like it would have been in our contest prep, but more often than not, people just hang around in a caloric deficit for too long, and their recovery can suffer and their training can suffer for that. So just make sure that you're taking things slowly, coming out of a contest season, and dial back your intensity and your frequency. Joe asked, how about post-show approach when you have another show in a week or two? Do you like to do anything different from the first couple of days to recover a bit, train nutrition, or right back at it the next day? Joe, I typically, like I said, I typically try to assign numbers. Maybe on Sunday I will assign a little bit higher numbers just to give my client a little bit something more to eat. But yeah, right back to the plan on Monday, absolutely. Just because if we need to do any changes, let's say we got some feedback from the judges and they want somebody a little bit leaner, we got to dig. We got to start digging, even if it's 1 week, even if it's 2 weeks. 2 weeks would be a little bit more optimal in between shows, just so there's a little bit more time to work. But you got to dig. you know, you got to get right back to the plan. And hopefully we've already done the work. Once again, like hopefully we're just increasing our food by then, so we could actually start bumping up calories. But if we need to dig, if we got other feedback, maybe if our timeline just didn't work out the way that we wanted to, you got to get right back on the plan and put your foot on the gas. You know, you can't take it off if there's 2 weeks to go to your next show. Julie asked a handful of questions, and I think Julie asked and then Lydia. Okay, cool. If anybody has any more questions on Facebook or Instagram here, please feel free to ask. It's not like I'm ending the video right this second, but I do want to make sure all your questions get answered. I know we're going at like the 32-minute mark already. I'm about to dive into a handful more questions that Julie asked. So please get your questions in now before it is too late. Julie asked, any suggestions on managing hunger fullness levels when going over macros is an option? And that's tough because obviously, like, post-show, your metabolism's going. I remember for months and months and months after I competed, like every time I would eat, I would like get super hot. Like I would just start sweating. Like my metabolism was just revving. Like I just wanted more and more and more food. And it is definitely hard to say no, especially like if your weight isn't going. And that is a tough one. So really, you just have to evaluate like day to day and week to week. You know, have I been increasing my food? How is my weight doing? If the answers are they've been holding steady, I've been increasing my food, give yourself a larger bump. You know, give yourself more voluminous foods, and I think that's another big one too. And I had this conversation, and I'm glad Julie asked this question. I just came up with the answer now, actually, because of one of my clients this past year, Matt. He was talking about being super duper hungry post-show, and granted, a lot of us are. But what Matt was doing is he changed a lot of the food that he was eating pre-contest. So obviously, like pre-contest, your calories are a little bit lower, and you're eating foods that are higher in volume. I feel like a lot of us do that, right? Smart move. Post-show, Matt was eating more calorically dense foods, and he was like, dude, I'm so fucking hungry. You know, and I was giving Matt all the food in the world, and he was just like, I'm super hungry, because he was just eating very, very dense food, and the volume just wasn't there. So I would recommend still sticking with a little bit higher volume post-show, just to help fight those hunger levels as well, and still make sure that you're getting enough fiber, because post-show, I feel like a lot of us, myself included, before try to get in a lot more of those fun foods that we weren't eating, and the fun foods like cereal or donuts or cake or ice cream, they don't have any fiber to it, right? So you're just going to burn right through it, and you're going to be hungry as fuck. So just make sure that you're still making responsible decisions after your show in regards to your food choices. Ben also added to this, adding food oftentimes isn't a hunger suppressant at all. Yeah, absolutely. So I think, Ben, you probably agree with my answer there, as the food choices that are going to be a big thing as far as suppressing hunger post-show as well. Julie also asked, do you prioritize eliminating cardio first or adding more food first, a combination of both? So ideally, I like to do a combination of both, but focus more on food, because I feel like a lot of people post-show are more food focused. So I give them huge bumps right off the bat just so they could hit their numbers, because if you start like bumping somebody's numbers just barely, 10 grams, 20 grams, like they're not going to want to stick to it. Like, let's be real, guys. Like, if you take your reverse so fucking slow, first of all, you're extending your deficit way longer than it needs to be, and you're more likely to have somebody go off their plan and just start binging if you go too slow about it. So I'm all for giving a large increase in food right off the bat, evaluating what happens and going from there. Sometimes within the first couple of weeks, I've increased male clients' carb intake over 150 grams. I know that sounds crazy, but their weight barely moved or just increased a little bit, and I just kept throwing more food at them, because at the end of the day, like, the goal should be just to increase your food as fast and as responsibly as possible, and not necessarily your weight. So this is where I disagree with some people, where they say that you need to gain a certain amount of weight post-show. And I know that we're 35 minutes into this video, and I haven't mentioned it yet. And that's on purpose. because I didn't want to come off, I didn't want to start off the video hot. So those of you who stayed tuned, I do appreciate it. But some people are under the impression that you need to gain a bunch of weight post-show to normalize hormones or whatever. I'm not necessarily a fan of that. I think that that is not something to focus on. I think that if you focus on food first and you start increasing your food at a faster rate, the weight will come naturally. I don't approve of chasing a number after stage because I feel like that actually encourages binge eating, right? Because if I tell one of my clients, let's say for instance, like my guy Matt, he competed the other day at about 153 pounds. If I said to him, I want you to be 170 pounds within 2 months, like he would just go and eat the world, right? And that's no way of reversing out of a show, in my opinion. I feel like if you want to eventually get your weight up, you should focus on food first and then the scale second, right? Start eating a bunch and then your weight will come up naturally. Don't chase a number on the scale, chase increasing your food instead. All right, Julie asked, what are your top 3 things an athlete can do immediately post-show, like the day after the show, to set themselves up for a successful off-season? Depending on how long or short your off-season is going to be, if it's going to be a short one, don't do a post-show binge. That sets you up for some immediate fat gain, so I guess that's 1. 2, clearly I didn't come up with these before the video, and that's okay because it's live. But 2, I would say take some time off. Take some time off from the gym. Just mentally refocus, right? That's a big one. Immediately after the show, don't work out. Your body needs time to recover. And then 3rd, I would say actually stop focusing on bodybuilding so much for a little bit. Let's say just a handful of weeks. Go and hang out with your friends, go hang out with your family, and actually get away from the bodybuilding lifestyle a little bit because you put so much effort into it. I can almost guarantee that some of your relationships have struggled. So that would be a time for you to kind of get back, recoup some of your friends. So those are actually my 3 things. Lydia asked the very last question here, and if anybody has any more or anything they'd like me to cover, go ahead and ask it now. Otherwise, we're going to cut this video shortly. Lydia asked, minimum amount of time to follow a structured reverse. Obviously, the immediate time period post-show is crucial for our metabolism. Let's be honest, many of us fall off the super structured reverse at some point in time, are a lot more loose with our tracking. Absolutely, as you should be. As the further out you get from a show, you could be looser in tracking when you get to your full-blown off-season. I would say minimal time, really 6 weeks, 4 to 6 weeks. If I had to push it back even more, ideally 12. But I would say you have to be as precise as you can for 4 to 6. That's where the absolute most damage is done. I would say 8 to 12 is more ideal to keep things under control, but 4 to 6, if you could get past those weeks without gaining a ton of weight, if you increase your food properly, if you're letting your weight come up naturally with the increased food, not chasing a number, I think that's the best way of doing it. Be as strict as you can for 4 to 6 weeks. Obviously, with the huge increases in food right off the bat, maybe even twice within the first week, depending on what your weight does. After 4 to 6 weeks, then you could start being a little bit more loose with your tracking. So guys, as always, I do appreciate you tuning in to these live videos. Hopefully you enjoyed them. Hopefully you learned something from them. Next week, if anybody has anything they would like me to talk about, please shoot me a direct message. If I get a good topic, I will put it up. If I don't get a topic, I might actually take a break next week. We'll see. But let me know. As always, guys, keep dominating every aspect, and we will see you very soon. Have a good night.